The Alternative Investment Fund Managers Directive was a response of policymakers to the crisis of 2007-2008. AIFMD has now been in operation for 8 years. And with me today, I have the pleasure of welcoming 3 distinguished speakers to reflect on AIFMD and the way forward. Has AIFMD reached its objectives, and is it still fit for purpose? Jeff, if we would like to get started on this one, please.
Yeah, thank you, Marc-André. We believe that the AIFMD does function fairly well and has been successful in achieving its objectives. We see a reduction in systemic risk and a reduction in the use of leverage. We see investor protection that's been enhanced and increased transparency. And we also see increased market efficiency and integrity. So we think that things are functioning well. We don't see a need to make any changes to level 1. We agree with the European Commission report that came out in June of last year that there are some fine-tuning measures that could be taken to slightly improve AIFMD, but in general, it's working well and it doesn't need to be changed. Changes, we have to recall, add cost and create regulatory uncertainty that can chill institutional investment in Europe just at a time now when it's so badly needed to recover from the COVID crisis.
From sort of an outside of Europe in investing into Europe, which is equally needed for the recovery, the AFM or the AFMD or the AFM offers a very good brand. I don't think the AFMD as such was needed intra-EU because, the relations built between investors is a trust-based relationship. But having that sort of all-encompassing brand as a pan-European for the pan-European marketing has definitely been benevolent to how outside investors perceive the European market. So in all, yes, it has worked. It's actually, I think, exceeded the expectation that some of my more critical members might have had 8 years ago. And to Jeff's point, we really don't see any need for changing it. There are always, small things that can be tweaked and turned and made more beautiful. But if you weigh that against a number of years of regulatory uncertainty of where this will be ending up, and given that we do have a very, very big European recovery to resolve, which needs more than ever private money, we don't really see that this is needed or indeed good timing.
AIFMD, we believe, has built an excellent track record, and this is seen together with the other sector legislation for asset managers' UCITS. But looking really on the AIFMD side with a lens of an asset management company, as Capital Group is, we should take into consideration the 2 main objectives that regulators had when they initiated the AIFMD as a new regulation, which was firstly to ensure proper financial stability and ensure that there are no risks at the system, but also at the level of investors, so also investor protection. And then the second goal was to ensure that investors had access to a wide range of products, so a competitive market for investors where they can make sure that their investment objectives are met. And we think both of these objectives are met because indeed this has been tested for several years now. In addition, we think it actually exceeded its objectives because it also brought a level playing field for European-based asset managers. They operate on common standards amongst themselves, but also by operating with the safeguards, they can also be recognized externally, so from actors outside from the European Union.
So you all made very positive statements on the outcomes of the AIFMD, and you also alluded at, let's say, looking at outside of Europe. So if we take a broader view and we see how our AIFMD and perhaps some of the other key industry directives across Europe perceived outside of Europe, does it help in positioning the asset management industry worldwide? Agathi, if you get started on this one, please.
So AIFMD is actually being the source of high quality services and products for investors. And by offering this kind of high quality services and products inside and outside Europe, it creates together with UCITS successful brands for the asset management sector.
Turning to you, Jeff.
Yes, of course, INREV represents institutional investors investing collectively into real estate in Europe, but we have investor members in North America, in Asia, and in the Middle East. And I've seen since AIFMD came into effect how their comfort level with investing in Europe through funds and other indirect vehicles has increased terrifically. There is a knowledge that there is investor protection, there are standards, there is a sort of harmonization of the types of regulations, and it gives them the comfort they need to feel that they can invest safely and soundly into European real estate through non-listed funds. So it's been much like the UCITS brand. It's become globally known. It has increased, I think, the flow of capital into Europe, and this is a critical feature of it that we don't want to overlook when we're looking at possible changes to the regime, because that can unsettle that comfort of global investors investing into Europe.
From a venture capital perspective, I think the starting point of any investment is a relationship building with, with your institutional investors, and any regulation can't really replace that in that segment of the market that's very relationship carried. But it gets you over the first threshold of those considerations by global investors and saying, but is there an investor protection? Is there a framework? Is there enforcement of these things? And once you get above that, then building the relationship that, maybe particularly for the smaller operators in my memberships, it's actually massively helpful. The admin burden of getting an AIFMD passport and all of that, taking that out of the account, that is on a global scale, it's a solid brand, comparable to, as my colleagues on the panel just said, comparable to the UCITS brand.
So I think you all made very positive statements. If you still had, one technical tweak to make to the AIFMD as part of the AIFMD review, any special wish, what would you advise the policymakers to look at?
I would love for politics to work like that. You're sort of in a binary communication with the policymakers of Europe. You could, I only have 3 wishes, and you only have to do those 3 things. I think when some of us or all of us are pleading against changes, is not because we don't have 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 minor tweaks that we'd love to get, but the point is that we might not have the same tweaks. And the moment that the Pandora's box of regulations open, then you're not necessarily controlling that. You get your 3 binary deliveries from the genie that you let out of the bottle. I represent closed-ended, non-leveraged funds, and I think that some of the considerations around the investor protection around leverage, liquidity issues is hardly relevant or not relevant at all for our members. What I fear is that we'll get sort of an all-encompassing UCITS 2, which is hardly useful from my members' perspective. In fact, we would rather have, let's segment it even more. Let's be more targeted at the issues or the segments of the sector that we think we need to solve issues with.
Agathi.
In a well-functioning regime, that I think we all agree today that is the case with the AIFMD, changes may actually bring risks, especially if it's untested type of changes. And therefore, my wish, although I realize it might sound contradictory, would be to make no changes, or at least that we first identify what are the inefficiencies that we as an industry or regulators want us to address, and then start to find dedicated solutions for these specific inefficiencies. Whereas moving forward with a review where, as we all mentioned, there is a very good track record and an efficient framework in place, may indeed bring at the end risks that not only lead to unintended consequences, but are there to resolve a problem that doesn't exist.
Jeff, a word of conclusion of this one.
I agree with both Martin and Agathi. I think the top the top headline of our wish list would be resist the urge to make changes to level 1 of AIFMD. In particular, we don't want to see product regulations added to AIFMD. It's a manager's regulation. We have identified in our submission to the European Commission a number of measures that could slightly improve AIFMD through level 2 and level 3 changes that are already within the authority of the European Commission to make. And so there are a number of practical measures that could significantly improve cross-border marketing and investor access, and in addition, ways to reduce costs, because in fact, the high cost of compliance of AIFMD is an impediment, particularly for smaller fund managers to be able to access the regime. And if those could be brought under control, we could then have even more fund managers opting in, even though they are sub-threshold. So this would be, I think, the main features of our wish list.
Jeff, on that note, if I were to wrap up, I understand that from all of you, concluding statement would be that AIFMD has met its objective, has significantly increased investor protection, has created a robust framework across Europe, has helped in attracting foreign capital into Europe as well, which at the time of recovery that we're going through these days, really makes sense. And no reason whatsoever to really redo it and retweak it again. So I'd like to thank you all, Martin from Invest Europe, Agathi from Capital Group, and Jeff from INREV for your insight and comments today. Thank you.